Hello! So, this will probably be a bit of a shorter video than usual, although I really need to stop saying that because then I get carried away and it isn't, but I think this will be, because I don't actually have that much to talk about this section, which isn't a bad thing, but it's very much the second act of a three-act story, and that means that nothing from the first part has been resolved yet in a way, so I can't really continue talking about any of the stuff from there, and there still really isn't any hint as to what the climax of this book will look like, so I can't talk about that either. So I'm not really going to be talking about the actual events that happen here in this section of the book. I'm mostly going to be talking about some of the, I guess, themes and sort of story threads that go through this part of the book that don't necessarily have anything to do with the events. And the events are interesting. There's a lot of very exciting action sequences here and stuff, but I don't really have much to say about them. I will say that structurally, I feel like this book has a few too many action scenes. And what I mean by that is it kind of feels like there's almost a quota. Like Sanderson is afraid to let too many chapters go by without anyone firing a gun. And I kind of felt that way in the first book, in Alloy of Law, and I didn't feel that way in the second book. But now I feel that way again. Like, oh, sorry about that. Like, this book just has too many shootouts, and they kind of all blend together, in my opinion. Which is a shame, because there was actually, I think, the potential for a much more unique action scene in New Saran. They're leaving New Saran now, and I feel like New Saran was perfectly set up for some kind of big action set piece involving the cliffs and gondolas, and maybe like Wax riding on top of a gondola or something. But that didn't happen. Instead, we got two pretty standard and boring action scenes instead within New Saran. The one on the train, though, was very exciting. I really liked the train one. That one did not at all feel like filler or like it was filling a quota. But the shootout at the graveyard and the shootout at the party both just kind of felt like they didn't need to happen. I don't know. That's just that's pretty much my only criticism of this book so far. Other than that, everything I'm really enjoying everything else. Speaking of stuff I'm enjoying, the developing relationship between Steris and Wax is really cute and really charming, and I'm really happy with where it's going. And I'm also really liking the development of Steris as a character. Steris is maybe the best, at least in my non-expert opinion, the best autistic character I've seen written by a non-autistic author. Nothing about her feels like a stereotype, and while the symptoms of her autism are often the center of jokes, the jokes are not at her expense. In fact, they're usually at the expense of other people and, in general, sort of holistic social norms, which is really refreshing, and I enjoy that. And I also really like that she is portrayed as an interesting and very desirable person. Like, Wax is falling in love with her, and also people other than Wax find her very attractive and want to spend time with her, which she herself is not used to because she's sort of learned to expect that to not be the case. So I'm really enjoying her arc, and I also really like how Wax doesn't coddle her. Like, he's worried about her, but he respects her enough to actually take her with him into dangerous situations, even though he feels like she shouldn't be there, because she says she wants to, and he just says, okay then, and does it. Which I like. One thing I found slightly weird is the idea of Steris not knowing how sex works at the age of, like, 30? I mean, apparently she knows the basic premise, but, like, she feels like she needs to read books about it to learn how human reproduction functions, and that seems odd to me. I'm not necessarily saying it's unrealistic. I mean, I can imagine that being the case for some people. But I don't know, it just doesn't seem in character that this is something she wouldn't know about. I don't know. It did lead to a very funny interaction, though, so I'll allow it. So the other sort of element of shipping that's going on here is Wayne and MeLaan, which I am absolutely on board for. I'm really enjoying that. So far, all of the romantic pairings in Era 2, or rather both of them, are ones I am really, really into. Much more so than any of the ones in Era 1. Which is nice. If there's going to be romance in a story, I would prefer for it to be romance I'm invested in, and in this case, I'm invested in both. I also really enjoy that MeLaan is being used to sort of play with concepts of gender a bit here. Like, she casually switches to male bodies, and some of the characters are outraged, but Wayne, her new boyfriend apparently, is not. He's like, who cares? Like, why is everyone making a big deal out of this? Yeah, sometimes she's a man. And it makes sense that Wayne would feel that way, because Wayne says things like, I need those shoes for the next time I'm an old woman, and stuff like that. Like, he's used to playing with gender presentation in his own life as well. That's another reason why I think MeLaan and Wayne work together quite well. Join me next time for my 10-page essay on why Wayne definitely gets pegged. That will not be happening. That will not be the topic of the next video, don't worry. Anyway. Then they get to New Saran after all that stuff on the train where those relationships develop. And in New Saran, we get one of my favorite pure comedy scenes, which I like to call the overwhelming of Aunt Jin, the hotel proprietress, where all of our crazy cast of characters are being their most insane selves and just completely overwhelming this poor woman. And I really enjoy that because I like that sometimes Sanderson gives us these little glimpses into what the main characters of these stories must look like to other people. Like, because we get so used to them after reading this. And this is something I commented on in Words of Radiance as well, where we got to see Kaladin through the perspective of other characters for the first time. And just, it turns out that Kaladin is actually an insufferable asshole a lot of the time, which is not the impression you get when reading his point of view, but it's actually completely accurate that he would be from the perspective of other people. And this is kind of that, where we sort of look at this group of characters like Wax, Wayne, Marasi, and Steris, and MeLaan, and we sort of think, like, you know, Wayne, Steris, and MeLaan are sort of the more out there ones, and Marasi and Wax are sort of the straight men of the group, in the mind of the reader. but then you're reminded that from the perspective of like a normal person, all 5 of these people are completely insane and like absolutely bizarre group of characters that cannot relate to normal people at all. None of them. And the fact that Marasi and Wax are slightly more normal than the other 3 does not mean that they are in any way, like, that they can pass as normal people to random strangers. So I like that. And the other thing I want to talk about here is some of the supernatural stuff going on in this section. I don't know why I say it that way. I mean, like, some of the more, like, Cosmere-y stuff. So, Wax is accosted by a woman at the party who dances with him, and who is really, really, really obviously a world hopper, and she doesn't even attempt to hide it. Like, she straight up says at one point, oh, infant mortality on Scadrial is not as bad as some other places. Which is not something you say if you've only been to Scadrial, which is what everyone on Scadrial has only been to. Like, that's a really blatant reference to world hopping, and I'm kind of surprised that Wax didn't mentally go, what the hell does that mean? Which actually kind of makes me wonder, do people on Scadrial call the planet Scadrial? I'm trying to remember if that's ever been used in the Mythborn books by characters before. Like I know that the people of Roshar call their world Roshar, but I don't know if that's true for any of the other planets. I can't remember. I don't think anyone in Elantris or the Emperor's Soul ever uses the name Cell, and I'm almost certain no one in Warbreaker uses the name Nulthis. But there's been so much Mythborn that I definitely wouldn't remember if someone here had used the word Scadrial, so I don't know if that's a name that's actually used by the inhabitants of the planet, or if it's just a name that the people who are aware of the larger Cosmere externally have given to this particular planet. But either way, I'm going to assume that this woman who dances with Wax here is Chris, the woman who writes the Ars Arcanum, because she questions him very much about the mechanics of Scadrial's investiture, the mechanics of not Hemalurgy, the other 2, Feruchemy and Allomancy. And that seems like something that the person writing the Ars Arcanum would be interested in. So I'm guessing that this is actually Chris literally like doing field research for the Ars Arcanum, which is a nice thing to see. She talks about the interaction between Wax's 2 powers, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't know enough physics to be able to tell how those powers would naturally interact, like increasing or decreasing your weight while flying thanks to a push against the flat surface or whatever. So I can't quite tell what effect the specific interaction between those 2 powers is having. So I won't go into that. But I will say it's quite interesting that she actually makes a point that he is, like, statistically, even though both of his powers individually aren't that uncommon. Like coin shots are like one of the most basic kinds of mistings, and I don't remember what they're called, lurchers, the Feruchemists who control their weight. Those are also presumably one of the more common kinds of pairings, just because that seems like a fairly basic form of Feruchemy that we see a lot of in the series. But because of how rare Feruchemists and Allomancers in general are, and then how much even rarer Twinborn are, that does mean that Wax is one of, like, an incredibly small number of people who have his specific set of powers. I believe Chris says that it's like 2 or 3 people other than him have ever been recorded as having this particular combination of powers. I'm just calling her Chris, by the way. I could be completely off about that. I could be wrong about who this woman is, but for now I'm calling her Chris. And the other thing she says, which is really interesting, is as she's leaving, she mutters about, now I need to figure out why there's no redshift involved in speed bubbles. And that was really fascinating to me, because redshift, in case you don't know, is a thing where basically, because of the way that things moving at light speed sort of warp time around them, I guess, light that we see coming from far away, like the light of distant stars, which sort of has this time distortion thing going on with it, sort of similar to the speed bubbles, where things moving at the speed of light experience time at a slower pace than things moving normally. Something like that. Anyway, that light sort of gets shifted a bit towards the red side of the visible spectrum. So from what I gather, when we look at distant stars, we are seeing them slightly redder than they would actually be, I think. I think that's basically the premise of redshift. And that makes this question really interesting, because it means that the world hoppers, or at least this world hopper, Chris, are aware of, like, pretty advanced concepts of astrophysics, which is exciting, because I really like the way that Sanderson sort of combines. I mean, he's sort of bringing in science fiction more into his fantasy. We saw a bit of this as well with some of the stuff on Roshar, where the Spren are clearly quantum in nature, which is fascinating. Anyway, of course, Chris is not the only world hopper who shows up in this section. There's also Hoid, and Hoid is very interesting to me in this book, because he chooses to get more directly involved than he usually does. I think he's only ever gotten this explicitly involved in the plot in Stormlight. Because, like, in Elantris and Mistborn Era 1, he just sort of played the role of like, he played a role of a character within the world, essentially. Like, another person could have easily filled his role in those stories. But here, that's not the case. Here, Hoid is clearly very much using his advanced knowledge and access to things that normal people wouldn't have to basically give Wax the coin, which is a hint for the future. Which is interesting. I wonder if that's because the events currently happening on Scadrial are of particular interest to him, or if it's because Hoid, at this point in his personal timeline, has sort of developed as a character and decided to take a more direct hand in events. And the other interesting thing that happens here is that Wax goes out into the mists at the end of this section, and he feels his wounds heal. Like, that's not explicitly how he perceives it, but what happens is, it says here, out in the mists, he felt better almost immediately, and his hand, which had been smarting where the terrace woman smacked his gun away, stopped throbbing. So, like, that's interesting. I don't remember that happening before with him or with any other misting. I think it's only happened with Vin, historically, and that was because she was literally drawing in Preservation's power from the mists, which shouldn't be there anymore. I'm kind of confused about what the mists are now. Because the mists still exist in Era 2, but they shouldn't. Because the mists were preservation's power, and all of that should be in Sazed now. So, like, what's going on there? I I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where this whole mists thing is going. Um, but yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about this section. Like I said, the only real issue I have here is that I'm kind of sad that we're already leaving New Saran. It felt like New Saran was an interesting setting that had more potential. Um, and I'm not going to talk about the political dimension here, like the conflict between New Saran and Allendale, because that will probably come to a head in the next section, and then I'll be able to talk about it more. I will say though, Wax being like very blasé about politics and not caring about politics and economics and stuff like that, and having Steris explain all that to him, that's something that seems in character for Wax, but I think it's kind of weird, just because we learned in the last book that one of the pivotal events in Wax's life was a time when his uncle essentially showed him how these complicated economic and political things can really hurt people. And Wax got really angry about that at the time as a child with the bank loan scene. And I'm kind of confused as to why that didn't like more permanently influence him, why he isn't more interested in that stuff now, since he learned at such an early age that it can hurt people and he was outraged by it. You'd think he would make it a point to really know how that stuff works so that he could protect people in the future, but apparently he hasn't. Which again, I don't think is out of character for him. He's very much focused on, shooting bad guys to the detriment of more useful ways of helping people, and I think part of his arc is about realizing that, maybe. I just find it odd that this particular thing is something he hasn't, focused more on. Anyway, that's gonna be that for this part of the book. I'll talk to you next week with the ending of the book, whatever that ends up being. I don't know. I haven't read it yet. Yeah. See you next week. Bye.